She mouthed it like spit. "The stinky country girl is here." That was the first thing I heard when I walked into my brother's engagement party, the bride, Sloane, leaning in like she owned the room. Her laugh cut through the chandeliers. People turned. A few flipped their phones like it was a show. I didn't yell. I didn't crumble. I folded my smile into something small and calm, the kind people miss until it's too late. You need to know me a little to get this right. I'm the kind of person who looks quiet until I move. I'm not loud. I don't crave the spotlight. I've learned the power of staying low and working. People call it humble. I call it invisible armor. Tonight, that armor felt funny against my skin, like it didn't want to be seen. Sloane's bridesmaids fluttered like moths around her. My brother looked nervous and proud and blind. He'd always been the kind to chase what's sparkling and loud. I was the one who fixed the thermostat when the family house froze in winter. The one they assumed would always be easy to step over. That kind of underestimation has a way of making people careless. That's the only reason Sloane got loud enough to whisper in front of everyone. I moved through the room slow so they could watch me. For them, it was the entrance of a joke. For me, it was field work. I let their eyes scan me like I was a small-town exhibit. Then I let the moment hang like a picture on the wall. I took my place by the hors d'oeuvres, listened to the buzz, and made a note of every face that sneered, every camera that lingered. People like easy stories. She gave them one. A girl from the country. A family that tied her to a label. She never thought to check the facts. That's the mistake I smelled in the air, casual, confident, and expensive. The kind of mistake that undoes people who build their life on flash instead of foundation. I didn't storm the stage. I didn't cause a scene. I sipped my drink and flashed a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Inside, I was doing math. Not numbers the way an accountant does, but people math. Who will believe what, who will cover for whom, and who will lose face if the truth comes out. I'm good at that math because I learned it young. Survival, after all, is a kind of accounting. Early note, if you like the kind of quiet, slow-burn stories that twist like this, consider subscribing. I'll be telling this whole thing, part by part. That little nudge helps get these stories to folks who like them, and it keeps me writing. No pressure, just a soft ask before we roll deeper. Sloane's voice finally cut me off with a look meant to finish the job. The whisper of dirt, the lift of a chin, the confident smirk. For most people, that's victory. For me, it was a signpost. Underestimate someone who looks like a punchline, and you gift them time. Time is the only currency I ever trusted. I left the ballroom a little later, letting them talk, letting the gossip seed itself and grow. I let them think I was stung, like a wounded animal who'd run. That image would fit their story and make them comfortable, until comfort turned to shock. There's a quiet satisfaction in watching people settle into what they expect, then pulling the rug. But patience matters. Revenge without a plan is just anger. I have plans. Tonight I walked out under the hotel lights and felt the city breath. They did not know I owned the place. They did not know I had the keys to more than just a building. They did not know what I could do with the seat of power already in my hand. Mostly, they didn't know me. But that night, I promised myself something small and steady. I would not let them write the ending. But that was only the beginning. What came next would change everything. I grew up in a town so small it felt like everyone shared one opinion. We had one grocery store, one diner, and a high school where the football field mattered more than the library. People knew my last name before they knew my first. That usually meant assumptions came preloaded. My brother was the golden one. Loud laugh, easy smile, always center stage. Teachers remembered him. Coaches praised him. Family gatherings bent around his stories like gravity. I learned early how to sit a little back, how to nod at the right times, how to help clean up without being asked. Being useful was how I stayed noticed, just enough to be needed, never enough to be celebrated. Money was always tight. We learned to stretch leftovers and fix things twice before replacing them. When something broke, I figured it out. I read manuals, watched old videos, asked quiet questions. I didn't talk about dreams because dreams felt expensive. I talked about plans because plans could be built one step at a time. When my brother left for college, everyone threw a party. When I left town a year later, it was quiet. No banners, No speeches, just my mom hugging me a little too long and saying, "Be careful." Careful was the word people used when they didn't expect much. I packed that word with me anyway. It reminded me to keep my head down. In the city, I worked jobs nobody bragged about, morning shifts, late nights. I saved tips and read contracts like novels. I listened more than I spoke. People like to explain themselves when they think you're harmless. I learned their tells, their shortcuts, their blind spots. I learned that confidence is often louder than competence, and that silence makes room for leverage. Back home, my family thought I was drifting. They asked what I did, and I gave them small answers because big ones invite opinions. Consulting, property stuff, nothing that would light up the room. My brother sent pictures from vacations and parties. I sent birthday cards on time. The distance grew, and with it, the freedom to build without being watched. Years later, when the engagement invite came, it felt like a test. Fancy paper, fancy venue. A name I recognized because I had signed it more than once. I almost laughed, almost. Instead, I RSVP'd yes and booked a simple dress. Nothing flashy, nothing that would warn them. That night in the ballroom, when Sloane whispered her insult, it landed on years of being overlooked. Not like a punch, more like a tap on a bruise you forgot you had. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table counting coins. I remembered learning to fix a furnace with numb fingers. I remembered how invisibility had trained me. The truth is, I didn't build my life to impress them. I built it to be solid, to last. While they chased applause, I chased paperwork. While they chased followers, I chased permits. The work was slow and boring and honest. It stacked quietly, brick by brick, contract by contract, asset by asset. That's the thing about humble beginnings, they teach you patience. And patience teaches you timing. As I left the party that night, I wasn't angry. Anger burns too fast. I was clear. Clear about what I knew, clear about what I could prove. Clear about how much damage careless words can do when spoken to the wrong person. I went home and opened a folder I hadn't touched in a while. Inside were documents, timelines, names, things that don't glitter but matter. I didn't act yet. I just updated the file and closed my laptop. Because before you pull a thread, you make sure it's the one that unravels the whole sweater. And that's when I realized the engagement wasn't just a celebration, it was a deadline. But I still wasn't ready to move, not until I understood exactly how deep their lies went. Family has a way of deciding who you are before you get a vote. In my house, my brother was the future, and I was the helper. Nobody said it out loud, but it showed up everywhere. Who got forgiven faster, who got extra chances, who got listened to. When my brother messed up, it was brushed off as a phase. When I did, it became a lesson. I learned not to ask for much. I learned to solve my own problems quietly. That kind of upbringing doesn't break you if you're careful. It sharpens you. I stayed in touch, but from a distance. Phone calls on holidays, quick check-ins. They liked hearing I was doing fine. Fine is a word that makes people comfortable. Comfortable people don't ask follow-up questions. While they assumed I was floating along, I was studying markets at night and meeting mentors in the morning. I watched how deals were made and how corners were cut. I learned which rules mattered and which ones were just noise. I built a reputation for being steady and boring. That reputation opened doors because people trusted me with things they wouldn't hand to someone flashy. I started small, one property, then another. I reinvested instead of celebrating. I read every clause twice. I kept my name off social media and my signature on documents that mattered. When mistakes happened, I fixed them quietly. When wins came, I stacked them and kept moving. Back home, the story stayed the same. My brother's life was loud. Promotions, parties, engagement announcements. My life was quiet. When my mother asked if I was happy, I told her yes. Happiness is personal, success is political. I chose privacy. At the engagement party, that old family dynamic snapped back into place. My brother introduced me with a half smile, like he was explaining a footnote. She's doing her thing. People nodded and moved on. Sloane didn't even bother to hide her judgment. She had already decided where I belonged. What she didn't know was that judgment makes people sloppy. It makes them talk. That night, I heard enough small comments to confirm a pattern. Bragging that didn't match reality. connections that felt borrowed, confidence built on assumptions that nobody would check. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't correct a single lie. I let them build the tower higher. Gravity loves tall towers. Later, alone, I reviewed my files again, cross-referenced timelines. Names overlapped where they shouldn't. Numbers were close but not clean. The kind of mess that gets hidden behind charm and fast talking. The kind that only surfaces when someone patient pulls at it. I thought about my family, how much they trusted appearances, how proud they were of this match. I felt a twinge of something like sadness. Not enough to stop me, but enough to remind me why I had to be careful. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about truth. I had spent years being underestimated. That underestimation was now an asset. No one watched my hands. No one questioned my access. I moved through systems like a ghost, leaving a clean trail behind me while theirs grew messy. That night, I made a decision. I would protect my family from the fallout, even if they never understood what I did for them. Quiet strength doesn't need applause. I shut down my laptop and set a reminder for the morning. There was one more angle I needed to check, one name that could turn suspicion into proof. And once I had proof, everything would change. Because the hardest part wasn't exposing the lie, it was choosing the moment that would hurt the most. By the time the sun came up the morning after the engagement party, I already knew something was off. Not in a dramatic way, in a pattern way. The kind you only see when you've been staring at spreadsheets and contracts long enough to recognize when numbers are trying too hard to look normal. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and went back through my early deals. Not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted to remember how I'd learned to spot trouble. My success didn't come from luck. It came from saying no more times than yes. From walking away when others rushed in. Years ago, I'd made a promise to myself. Never build anything I couldn't explain on a single sheet of paper. That rule saved me more times than I can count. It forced clarity. And clarity is poison to people who live on shortcuts. While my family thought I was just doing property stuff, I was building relationships with inspectors, auditors, attorneys, and quiet professionals who value discretion over drama. I paid on time. I kept my word. I didn't brag. That's how trust compounds. The hotel where the engagement party was held, I didn't put my name on the front. I never do. I own through clean structures, managed by people who know the rules and respect them. Power doesn't need a logo. It needs leverage. Back home, the phone calls kept coming. My mom was excited. My brother was stressed. Sloan was planning a wedding that felt more like a production. No one asked me much. That suited me. I listened. I took notes. Then I noticed something interesting. Sloane's family kept mentioning a foundation they ran. Big words. Big promises. Small details. Whenever details came up, the conversation shifted. That's a tell. People who do real good love specifics. People who fake it hide behind slogans. I pulled public records. Nothing illegal at first glance. Just messy, late filings, overlapping addresses, donations moving in circles, not enough to accuse, but enough to keep digging. This was the part I enjoyed in a calm way. The work, the focus, the certainty that truth leaves fingerprints if you know where to look. I wasn't rushing. I had time. Weddings take months. Lies get lazy over time. At a family dinner a week later, Sloane smiled at me like we were old friends. The insult was forgotten, or so she thought. I returned the smile. People mistake kindness for weakness. I let her. My brother talked about future plans, investments, opportunities. I nodded and asked simple questions. The answers were vague. Vague answers are another tell. I excused myself early and drove home, already connecting dots. That night I called an old contact, someone who doesn't scare easy and doesn't gossip. I asked a few careful questions. I didn't push. I just listened. When the call ended, I sat still for a long moment. Because now I knew. This wasn't just about ego or class or a rude whisper at a party. This was about money moving where it shouldn't, names being used without consent, and a family building status on a shaky foundation. I felt the weight of it then. Not fear, responsibility. If I moved wrong, people I loved could get hurt. If I stayed silent, worse things could happen later. So I made another promise to myself. I would do this clean. No drama. No shouting. Just facts, timing, and daylight. I closed my notebook and wrote one sentence at the top of a fresh page. Wait until they think they're safe. Because when people believe they've already won, they stop checking the doors. And that's when the truth walks right in. But what I uncovered next wasn't just suspicious, it was dangerous. I didn't go looking for a scandal. I went looking for clarity. But clarity has a way of turning ugly when people have been hiding things in plain sight. It started with that foundation Sloane's family loved to talk about. On paper, it was all smiles and good intentions. Helping communities, supporting local causes. The kind of thing that looks great in wedding speeches and glossy programs. But when I traced the numbers, they didn't add up. Money went in circles. Donations came back as consulting fees. Properties tied to the foundation quietly ended up under private control. This wasn't charity. It was laundering respectability. I moved slowly. I double-checked everything. I pulled filings from different years and lined them up. Same names, different titles, same addresses, different purposes. It was the kind of setup that relies on no one paying close attention. And most people don't. They see confidence and assume competence. What made my stomach drop wasn't the money. It was the risk. Some of those funds were tied to partners who don't forgive mistakes. If the truth came out the wrong way, my brother could be pulled into a mess he didn't create. My family's name could be dragged through something they didn't understand. That's when this stopped being personal and started being necessary. I called in a favor from someone who owed me quiet honesty. We met in a place with bad coffee and no distractions. I laid out what I had piece by piece. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You're right. And it's bigger than you think." There were shell companies, false valuations, loans taken against assets that didn't exist the way they claimed. Sloane's family wasn't just faking generosity, they were building their lifestyle on borrowed time. The wedding, it wasn't just love, it was a merger. Access, image, suddenly the whispers at the party made sense. The confidence, the cruelty, people who feel secure don't need to put others down, people who are scared do. I went home and sat in the dark for a long time. I thought about my brother's smile, about my mother's pride, about how easily families get hurt by things they never see coming. I knew then that whatever I did next had to be precise. No half measures, no emotional moves. This is where patience matters. I didn't confront Sloane. I didn't warn anyone yet. I kept collecting dates, emails, transactions. I built a timeline so clean it could stand on its own without my voice. Around this time, I noticed something else. Sloane's family had been quietly leaning on my brother, encouraging him to co-sign, to invest, to help with logistics. They were trying to tie him in, make him useful. That was the line. I stepped in without stepping forward. I advised through channels that didn't lead back to me. Deals stalled. Paperwork slowed. Questions were raised in rooms I wasn't in. They felt the friction but couldn't see the hand. If you're still with me here, take a breath, because this is where the story tightens. And if stories about quiet power and careful moves are your thing, stick around. The next turn is where the pressure really starts to show. By the time Sloane's family realized something was wrong, they were already trapped by their own paper trail. And the closer the wedding date got, the more desperate their moves became. Because the truth was now boxed in, and boxes always break. But I still hadn't pulled the trigger, not until I knew exactly who would fall when it did. By the time I reached out to the last name on my list, I wasn't surprised anymore. I was just careful. The man on the other end of the call didn't know me, but he knew my work. That's the advantage of building quietly. You become trusted without being famous. I told him I was reviewing a set of transactions and needed an outside opinion. I didn't mention Sloane. I didn't mention the wedding. I just asked about the structure. He paused longer than I liked. Then he said, "If this goes public the wrong way, someone's going to get hurt." That was confirmation. The foundation wasn't just messy. It was being used as cover to move money tied to risky investors. Some of those investors had already started asking questions. Sloane's family had been buying time with charm and big events, fundraisers, galas, and now a wedding that signaled stability. Marrying into a clean family like mine wasn't an accident. It was insurance. That's when the weight of it settled in my chest. My brother wasn't just being welcomed, he was being positioned. I didn't sleep much that week. Not because I was scared, but because timing is everything and I could feel the window narrowing. If I moved too early, they'd cry misunderstanding. Too late, and my brother could be legally tied to something rotten. So I chose control. I quietly redirected a few key approvals. Nothing illegal, just due process actually being followed, audits scheduled, reviews requested. Doors that had been swinging open suddenly required keys. The panic didn't show up in public. It showed up in the margins. Emails sent at odd hours, calls that went unanswered, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Sloane got sharper, more impatient. Her family leaned harder on my brother, pushing urgency. I watched all of it without reacting. At a family dinner, Sloane talked about starting fresh and building something honest together. I kept my face neutral. Honest is a word liars love. It sounds clean. It hides mess. Later that night, I sat down with my brother, just the two of us. No accusations, no evidence on the table. I asked him one question. If something didn't feel right, would you slow down? He laughed it off, said I worried too much. That he trusted Sloane. I nodded. Trust is easy when someone else is doing the thinking. I left him with one thing only: don't sign anything without time. He promised. That promise bought me space. Behind the scenes, I finalized what I needed. A clean packet of proof, verified by people whose names carry weight. I didn't plan to expose them myself. I planned to let the truth stand up on its own. This wasn't revenge fueled by anger. It was protection guided by patience. As the wedding week approached, the pressure spiked. Sloane's family pushed for last-minute financial moves, emergency favors, just this once requests. Each one added another thread to the net they were already tangled in. Then came the call I'd been expecting and dreading. A regulator wanted clarification, not from me, from them. I knew then that the plan was ready to move from preparation to execution. The truth was no longer theoretical. It was knocking. I stood by the window that night and watched the city lights, steady and indifferent. Power doesn't rush. It waits for alignment, and everything was aligned. Because once the questions started, there would be no way to keep the story straight. And when the story breaks, everyone hears it. The only thing left was choosing where the spotlight would fall first. I didn't crash the wedding week with a speech or a leak. I did something quieter. I let the system do what it's supposed to do when people stop greasing the wheels. The first sign came 2 days before the rehearsal dinner. A venue issue, then a funding delay. Nothing dramatic, just enough friction to raise eyebrows. Sloane's family smiled through it, but the smiles were tight. They were running out of room to maneuver. I stayed in the background, helping where I could, being the calm relative everyone forgets is in the room. That's the role I know best. And it gave me the best seat in the house. Behind the scenes, the reviews I'd requested moved forward. Not because of me, but because the paperwork demanded it. When rules are followed properly, lies have nowhere to hide. People think power is loud. It isn't. It's procedural. The night before the wedding, Sloane pulled me aside. Her voice was sweet. Her eyes were sharp. She asked what I did for a living again, like she was hearing it for the first time. I gave her the same small answer. She searched my face and found nothing. That scared her more than anger would have. If you're listening to this and thinking, why not just blow it up already? Here's why. Exposure works best when the audience is already seated. And trust me, they were seated. The wedding morning arrived heavy with expectation. Cameras, guests, important people who like to be seen, the kind of crowd that believes appearances means safety. I stood near the back, dressed simply, breathing steady. Then the emails started landing. Quiet notifications, phones buzzing, one person stepping out, then another, a board member whispering to a lawyer. The questions were official now, real, impossible to laugh off. I watched Sloane's family feel it before they understood it. That shift when confidence drains and calculation takes over. The room changed temperature. The smiles froze. Here's a quick pause. If stories like this pull you in, and you appreciate slow-burn truths instead of cheap drama, this is a good moment to subscribe or like. It helps these stories find people who value patience and clarity. Now back to it. The ceremony was delayed, No announcement, just confusion. The officiant checked his phone twice. My brother looked at Sloane, searching for reassurance. She squeezed his hand too tight. Then someone important didn't show. Then another. Finally, a representative arrived, not for the wedding but for answers. They didn't raise their voice. They didn't accuse. They asked for documentation. Right now, that's when the collapse began, not with shouting but with silence. Sloane's family tried to redirect. Private rooms, urgent calls, but you can't outrun paper trails. The foundation's filings were being reviewed. Accounts flagged. Partnerships paused. My brother looked at me then, really looked. And in that moment, he understood something was wrong and that I hadn't been guessing. I didn't say a word. I let the truth speak in its own calm, devastating voice. The wedding didn't end in chaos. It ended in uncertainty. Guests left early. Conversations stalled. Photos went unfinished. The image they'd built cracked under daylight. As I stepped outside for air, I felt something like relief. Not joy, relief. The kind that comes when you've held a weight long enough and finally set it down. But it wasn't over yet, because public image takes time to fall, and what was coming next would make sure there was no way back. By the next morning, the story had a shape. Not the kind you control, but the kind that spreads because it's solid. People talk when events don't go as planned. They talk more when important names go quiet. Sloane's family tried to keep things contained, but containment only works when there's nothing to contain. This time, there was plenty. The foundation suspended operations temporarily. Partners released careful statements. A few donors asked for their money back. None of it said fraud out loud, but everyone heard it anyway. Silence is loud when it comes from the right places. My brother stayed with me that day. He didn't ask many questions. He just sat, staring at his phone, watching his future rearrange itself in real time. I stayed close, answering only what I could prove. I didn't gloat. I didn't say, "I told you so." Truth doesn't need a victory lap. Sloane stopped calling. Her family tried once, just once, to reach out. The message was polite, almost friendly, asking for a conversation. I declined. Conversations are for misunderstandings. This wasn't one. As the week went on, the consequences stacked. Accounts froze. Invitations vanished. People who once returned calls instantly suddenly became unavailable. Social power is fragile like that. It exists only as long as others believe in it. I watched from the sidelines as their world shrank. Not with pleasure, with clarity. This was always the outcome. Gravity doesn't celebrate when something falls. It just does its job. One afternoon, my brother finally asked how I knew. I told him the simple version. Patterns, paper, patience. I didn't overwhelm him with details. He was already processing enough. He asked why I hadn't said more sooner. I told him the truth. You weren't ready to hear it. And I needed proof. That landed. The public exposure wasn't dramatic. No headlines screaming names, just a steady drip of facts that made it impossible to pretend. Boards don't like uncertainty. Banks don't like questions. When trust disappears, so does access. Sloane reappeared once briefly at a distance. She looked smaller, not because she lost status, but because status had been carrying her posture. Without it, she was just a person with bad choices and worse timing. We didn't speak. I didn't need closure from her. Closure isn't something other people give you. It's something you take when you decide to stop carrying the weight. As things settled, my family started asking different questions. Real ones, about my work, about how long I'd been doing it, about why I never talked about it. I answered honestly, without embellishment. For the first time, they listened. That shift mattered more than the exposure. Reputation can be rebuilt. Trust, sometimes. But recognition, real recognition, changes the shape of a family. The dust didn't clear all at once. It never does. But the danger passed. My brother was safe. The lies had nowhere left to hide. And as I stood in the quiet after, I realized something important. I hadn't ruined anyone. I had simply stopped protecting a lie. And that's when the final lesson settled in, one that would stay with all of us long after the whispers faded. The weeks after everything fell apart were quieter than I expected. No shouting, no dramatic apologies. Just space, clean, honest space where lies used to live. My brother moved slowly through that space at first. He replayed moments in his head, looking for signs he missed. I didn't rush him. Healing isn't something you schedule. One evening, he finally said, "I should have listened to you." I told him the truth. "You listened when it mattered." That was enough. My family saw me differently after that. Not suddenly, not all at once, but in the small ways that count. Questions asked with respect. Opinions weighed instead of brushed aside. Pride that didn't need to be loud to be real. I didn't ask for recognition, but I accepted it when it came.